Almost every spiritual tradition that has anything written, you'll find in their scriptures, they'll say, keep the company of the faithful. And it doesn't matter if that's Buddhism, Hinduism, you know, any of the yogic systems, whatever. They all say, keep the company of the faithful. And what's that about? It's about spending time with like-minded and like-hearted and like-spirited people who reinforce and support you in your own pursuit of the path. And the path can be any denomination, no denomination, very well thought out, abstractly kind of wandered about, it doesn't matter. We have in this gathering, and I really want to thank Stephen and Selena and all of the fine, fine presenters. We have the company of the faithful. It's great. It's great. I have to respond to something that Mark said about possibly like having your parents sit in while you're tripping. When I was a teenager, I wasn't going to talk about this at all, but I can't resist. When I was a teenager and I was about 16, I was with a very good friend of mine. It was close to Christmas time. My parents were out at a company party that my dad was at, and I said to my friend Chris, let's drop acid. There's no one home. So we both took acid, and it turned out to be very, very strong. It was like 200 micrograms or something. We were having a great time until we heard a whole bunch of cars pull up in front of the house. And it was like not one car. The first car was my parents, but then there was this whole train of cars behind it, which didn't really make any sense. It was about 11:30 at night. And this was, as I said, near Christmas. And we were ripping mad high at this point. We were just headed into the peaking zone. And my friend Chris was very alarmed. And we could see my parents walking in. And my dad sort of burst in the door. And I could hear him saying, turning his back to us as he walked in, saying, "Don't worry, my son will bartend." And my friend Chris was in an absolute mad panic. And he said, "What are we going to do?" And I said, "We are going to get them so drunk they won't notice that we're tripping." Now, I'd never actually mixed a drink in my life, but when somebody asked for a gin and tonic, they got 10 ounces of gin and 2 ounces of tonic. Scotch and water, no problem. That was scotch first, water second. I can do that. In short order, we had 27 really, really smashed drunk adults. If we had set our hair on fire, they wouldn't have noticed. So I have had the experience of having my parents watch in on me tripping. They just never knew that at the time. We all have strings that we pull in our lives, themes that run through our lives, pursuits, engagements of all different kinds, and some of these are spiritual ones. When you consider certain common threads, by the way, this is apparently a talk on a unified field theory. I made this like really grandiose claim on the phone to Steve, and so now I got to live up to it, but I'm going to get to that. So we have these themes, and it may be a life of yoga practice or meditation or sacred dance or something else, or the use of psychedelics. In my case, the things that have informed me spiritually have been having a grandfather and grandmother who were, he was a minister and she was really his ally and constant aid. And what I saw in their lives was constant devotion to service. They didn't care who you were. They didn't care if you were a Buddhist, a Hindu, a Jew, whatever. My grandfather wound up doing services for the Hells Angels because nobody else would. Everybody was like, "What are you kidding me? I'm going to go do a service for the Hells Angels? Get out of here. They scare me." And his attitude was, "They're people. I'll help them." So one of the things that first earliest informed me was this sense of service to others. In my earlier teen years, by 15, I started in on psychedelics. And so did my friends. And many of us wound up just kind of, as a result, going, oh, we should be practicing yoga, right? I mean, it's like the idea fell on us like a heavy rain. And does anybody here know how to cook brown rice? I took it upon myself to learn how to cook brown rice. Everybody was like so grateful because other people were like, I keep burning this shit, you know? This is not Uncle Ben's. And, well, you know, for a time, like, you know, we just said, well, should we, like, learn about herbs? Yeah, but where are we going to go? Who knows anything about herbs, you know? And so I would wander around Chinatown, and I'd go into these herbal apothecaries, and I knew ginseng exactly and nothing else. And I was kind of a nuisance in these apothecaries in Boston. And then I would go to these really, really, like, low-grade kung fu movies that were held in the porno theater. The porno movies at night, the kung fu movies during the day, and I was like the only non-Chinese person in the place, right? So it's all mostly Chinese guys smoking cigarettes, spitting on the floor, and eating really smelly, spicy food. And I didn't understand any Mandarin or whatever the language was, but you didn't have to because you knew who the good guy was, you knew who the bad people were, you knew who the love interests were, and of course you knew how it was going to settle out. So that initial sort of totally untrained, directionless interest in plants led me on a kind of a merry journey, and now, you know, that I'm in my, well, past mid-60s, actually, which is sort of hard to believe. I have spent decades pursuing plants of all different kinds. You know, the so-called superfoods and medicinal plants of all different types, and of course psychoactive plants. And because I do this for work, I somehow in the media, I get just like treated so well. If I talk about, you know, sitting drinking hallucinogenic potions with shamans, they don't deride me. They go, whoa, yes, of course, because that's what you do. And I'm like, yes, that's what I do. Yeah, man, sure. I get a pass. I get a free pass. And it also allowed me to like burn all my ties and give away my suits years ago, because you can't be a botanical explorer, a medicine hunter, and wear a suit, I found out. That's a good thing. So in any case, other things that have informed me have been body surfing. I've been body surfing since I was a little boy. And when I am in the wave, when I am completely enveloped by that water, I am, I assure you, having a mystical experience. That ride is the only thing that's happening. My mind is shut off. My senses are completely alive. Every part of me is sensing and feeling the minute adjustments of the water as the wave breaks and moves forward. This has been an enormous pursuit for me. My 46 years of daily yoga, I often don't get into things lightly. So my idea of getting into yoga was for about the first 7, 8 years or so, I did around 4 to 8 hours of yoga a day just to really get my feet wet. And I was living in an ashram and, you know, was like sleeping only a few hours a night. And that proved to be a mistake, by the way. I eventually drove a car through a phone pole. And the phone pole then crushed the car, and that made things a little difficult for me. But in any case, all of these different threads, the medicinal plants, the psychedelics, the body surfing, the service orientation, the yoga, all of the experts and people I have met, these have all informed me along the way. One thing that is common if you read any of the literature on mystical experience, the sense of the loss of sense of self, kind of dissolving into the infinite, the sense of being connected to all things and everything at all times, and the sense of timelessness. These seem to be thematic in the mystical experience. And I mentioned yesterday that one of the published psychedelic studies, and I think it was an LSD study on alcoholism, identified that it was, as I said yesterday, the extent to which the person had a mystical experience that was the key factor in whether or not they were healed. The extent to which they broke through to this state of infinite consciousness, however long or brief that is. I have been it's amazing to me, and not sad, just kind of humorous actually, that I remain so dense and ego-bound given the absolute truckloads of mystical experiences I've had. I mean, I haven't had one high yogi, like, give me Shaktipat and blow me away. I mean, I've had it by the dozens. I should, in fact, be a living Buddha at this time. I've had shamans, you know, just like doing the intense download, like, man, I am giving you the full throttle, everything, the all, there's nothing left on the table deal. And, you know, here I am, still like full of flaws and mistakes and all that stuff, which is really kind of what being embodied is about. We do not actually achieve perfection. I'm sort of fascinated by the idea, Liana brought this up today, that people are trying to figure out if something's real or not. No two of us in this room could agree on real for anything. How do you define real? We can't have an objective experiment in science at all. There has never been such a thing, because there is always there's always a person participating in the experiment. And it is widely acknowledged that however minimal or invasive our participation is, even as a so-called observer, that affects the experiment, that affects the outcome. We cannot say that we have ever had an objective experiment in history. And I would suggest to you that asking if something is real might possibly be a self-misleading question. Instead, I like the Zen saying, look to the obvious. When a person who experiences trauma and maybe has been dogged by trauma for much of their life, and as a result has suffered and has felt inhibited from experiencing their true happiness, and they consume the mushrooms, they chew the peyote buttons, they do the tab of acid, hopefully not all at the same time. Or they drink the cup of ayahuasca, and they have an experience that for them is transformative, and they come out the other side without that trauma. When that occurs, in my estimation, that's the thing to focus on. Is the pink elephant with the shiny gold hat sitting on the odd blue toilet seat that they saw in their vision that told them to leave their trauma behind real? Who cares? What is the effect? You know, our minds are very, very strange, okay? I used to see these like robotic the number 15 tomato cans, the big tomato cans, like the kind they have in the PXs and stuff for military people, the huge ones. I used to see these robotic characters in ayahuasca ceremony with these huge tomato can heads. I have no interest in robots. And it'd be like, oh, you again, ah. And then for a time, there were these 4 characters with these kind of like pink elephant noses, and as I'd approach them, they'd wave them, hello. It's like, who are you guys? Is this real? Are you kidding me? Yeah, but the transformative effects of the plants are real to us. They inform us, they heal us, they guide us, they open us up, they illuminate us. What is this illumination thing? Every mystical experience, virtually every mystical experience involves light. Why is that? Is light, in fact, the nature, the fundamental nature of wisdom? There is a cathedral in Moscow, and I'm sorry that I forget the name of it, but it has the most absolutely mind-blowing ceiling painting, and it does not matter whether you're religious or not. if you go into this place, it is basically a depiction of Christ with his heart just like completely blown to pieces open and light streaming in all directions from this vast high domed ceiling. And I, did what you'd expect a guy like me to do. I got on the floor and lay down and looked up. And it was such a spectacular representation of spirit. I didn't care what denomination it was. It was so beautifully representative of something that we have a hard time describing. One of the themes here over the yesterday and today has been what artifacts or what things do we bring back from our experiences that we can share that somehow help people who haven't had those experiences to accept that there are all these infinite possibilities that they may not yet have encountered. And I would suggest to you that as I forget who it was who said it, I think maybe, I don't know who it was, something like Alex Gray's paintings. Yeah, absolutely. They show something. If you've actually stood in front of the sacred mirrors, and I have, there's this remarkable kind of transference that goes back and forth. And it really is a sort of a self-dissolving experience to stand in front of those. But what if you're not an artist? What if you draw like I do? I mean, if I showed you a picture of one of my ayahuasca visions, you'd say, I don't want anything to do with that because I'm a lousy artist. But in various ways, I would submit to you that everybody who's gotten up here over the course of this 2 days has one way or another transmitted something of and in some manner represented the medicines. And I think that is, I get a lot of people who say, I went down to Peru or Ecuador or Colombia or Brazil and I did ayahuasca and I'm just like trying to reckon with how to tell my family. And you can do it, sort of the way I did it at Thanksgiving dinner. My uncle likes to go around the table. He's got, and tell me about your year. What was your greatest accomplishment this year? And he sort of likes to direct that thing, and they got to me, and I said, well, I just came back from being down in the Amazon where I, drank this psychedelic potion that these shamans make and sat on the floor on a mat so I could get rid of the grief over the death of your sister. There's kind of like a little pause. That would be my mother. And but what happened was fabulous. What happened was people in the family said, that sounds pretty strange, but you look great. You look happy. And that was the biggest proof. So what I would suggest is that it doesn't require being an Alex Gray painter. It doesn't require being a Yehudi Menuhin violinist. It requires carrying the effect. If the effect is that you've been healed, you're going to show that. Unless you hide in a closet and tell people to stay away, you're going to show that. That is going to be self-evident. And that is a great way to carry the medicine forward. It need not be due to some particularly visible talent. I've had, been given a lot of direction. This one blind yogi in India who just to set the scene, he would do 7 pujas a day. Keep in mind the word blind as in do not see, okay? And this guy would do 7 fire pujas every day in his living room. His living room was covered with about a ½ inch of soot because, of course, over time he was like constantly setting fire to everything because he was blind. And he had this completely crazed personal attendant. You'd be crazed if you were the attendant of this guy too, who was always like running around slapping the fire out on the rug as Maharaji was, yeah, Om Shani, Om Ganesha, Om, yeah, and throwing the flames all over the place. And there's Sri Ram on his hands and knees scrambling to pick up the coals. And so anyway, this guy, Maharaji, at one point, 2 things happened. One, he said, you will come to my festival tomorrow. And he said it in Hindi, and this taxi driver had to translate. And I said, oh, thank you so much, you know, but me and my girlfriend, we're going to be out of town. We're going to take an early train. And he's like, no, 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 no. You'll be at my festival tomorrow. And I didn't want to be, you know, he's like this old guy, and I don't want to be unkind or whatever. So I said, yeah, okay, fine, you know, I think we're going to be out of town. And the cab driver later on said to us, listen, you know, I know you think that you've got a train to catch at 11 o'clock in the morning, and I will be there to take you to the train, but really, I think you're going to wind up at Maharaji's festival. And so anyway, 10 o'clock in the morning came, my girlfriend got terribly sick, we couldn't go to the train, like 11:15, she was miraculously cured. We wound up at the festival. But anyway, this guy at one point said to me, you know, you're going to spend a lot of time bringing a lot of good word and light to people. And that was a very, very wonderful and kind and sweet thing for him to say. A woman in the Brazilian Amazon, when I was first staying in the Amazon, was there for about a month living with Ipashuna and Krinakoru Indians, and I said, you know, I really want to go around and see shamans, and they're like, shamans? Why in the world do you want to go around and see shamans? And I said, well, I think they know something. And these people were already removed from that tradition, and they said, well, if you're going to see shamans, we're going to see shamans. The implications of which were when my friend Ipupiara, who was definitely a trickster and a shaman, said to me, you're going to have to rent a boat, big guy. I said, okay, no problem, I'll rent a boat. He came back to me the next day and said, it's going to cost you $150. I said, okay. The next day at 4:30 in the morning, a 2-decker gigantic-assed riverboat pulled up to our shack like a floating hotel, and I said, what's going on? He says, oh man, everybody's coming. They don't want to miss out on this. So it's all of the neighbors. It's their kids. It's their dogs. It's their laundry. It's their cooking pots. And of course, it's the TV that I bought this one family because they're going to hook it up to the generator and they are going to watch Brazilian soccer as we go down to the river to see these shamans. So we're in pursuit of this legendary shaman of shamans named Maria Sina. And it's one of those classic stories that we would get someplace and say, oh, yeah, Maria Sina. Yeah, she was just here. She left, man. Okay, where'd she go? Well, I think she went, you know, like towards past Iranduba. Okay, so we go there and they go, yeah, no, we know Maria Sina. Yeah, no, she went home. So we kind of chased her around for a few days, and we eventually found this woman. And she was at 103. She had all her wits about her. She was really, really teeny. Age will do that to you. She was probably about 65 pounds soaking wet, had long, long hair. And she said something to me that I really took as marching orders. She said, you bridge the worlds. You tell people about each other. And she went on to describe how in a time of turbulence and in a time of mistrust and misunderstanding, we need people to carry messages back and forth between people, between cultures, between societies, between different groups, so that we can maintain empathy, so that we can remember to be kind to each other. And I never forgot that. I took that really to heart. That was kind of on top of a shamanic ceremony with no psychoactive substances of any kind, in which I found myself in a cave with a mountain lion. And as this mountain lion was walking by me, the shaman who was officiating the ceremony called out, he said, don't forget to ask for a teaching. And so I turned to this mountain lion. I said, do you have a teaching for me? And it looked up to me and it said, you must travel to many worlds and tell people what you saw. And then it went out of the cave. So these are the strings that I pull on. These are the deep resources that I go into for my own mystical journey, for my own spiritual journey, for my own ways of figuring out how to serve others. And that sort of brings us to some of the, what is a unified field theory? If you looked at the program, I was sort of horrified what I promised actually, but No, you know, it's like the spirit of the moment. And yes, I'd love to come to your conference. And sure, you know. So anyway, I picked up on a few things that some people said here that I'd like to refer to. One was with what Liana said about it being curious that activity in the brain goes down with psychedelics. This actually makes all the sense in the world. There's a good study showing that neural pathways, which are the ways that we, you know, that basically the habits, the behaviors that we learn to do automatically or quickly and easily, that these are suspended during the psychedelic experience. So we've got this reduced brain activity in certain areas, especially in areas of cognitive function, thinking. We have a notion out there on the part of neuroscientists that the 2 billion or so neurons in the brain have so many possible interconnections between them that the number of connections between neurons in the brain, the possible connections, exceeds the number of atoms in the universe. Okay, that's big. And we have the cessation, we have the absolute cessation in a powerful psychedelic experience of these neural pathways. You know, when you were a little kid and you first learned to make a sandwich, you know, you tear the bread and you like get the peanut butter all over the shelf and all that. And over time, as you get better and better, you only get the peanut butter in your hair. And so, but these habits, these pathways, walking to your car, opening the door, getting inside, you know, closing the door, putting on your seatbelt, putting the key in they're all automatic. And so are many of our responses and our fears and our reactions based on things that have happened to us. These are graven into our brains, and these get suspended. And when they get suspended, what's the implication of that? The implication is that the brain suddenly becomes a vastly open, wide field. Instead of particular patterns running, it's this global sense of the infinite. And it's not actually infinite, of course, because we are in these bodies. By the way, as long as human beings fail to recognize on a large scale that we are spiritual beings embodying these physical bodies for a time, we will continue to make every material mistake that it is possible to make. As long as we fail to understand that we are first and foremost fundamentally spiritual beings with the capacity to experience the total interconnectedness with all things and timelessness and the dissolution of the small self, we will continue to make the same mistakes we've always made because we will have a sense of I and other. Now, there's a lot of conversation these days about non-duality, about I and other, and arriving at a place through meditation, through psychedelics, through sacred dance, through so many different things, at which you immediately apprehend without thought or without rumination of any kind how we are all connected. And that happens so often in the psychedelic experience. When you consume the mushrooms, when you drink the San Pedro, when you eat the peyote cactus. I was in a peyote ceremony about 1.5 years ago, and you know, after drinking ayahuasca for many years, I got to tell you, peyote tastes like M&Ms to me. So people are in the ceremonies going, oh God, this is awful, and I'm eating this going, you know, it tastes like cookies to me compared to ayahuasca. It's just plain better. Better tasting anyway. So where I'm angling with this harkens back to the origins of yoga philosophy. If you're familiar with yoga, Patanjali, a long time ago, wrote the Yoga Sutras, in which he described that everything arises from infinite mind. Now, I would tell you that the Unified Field Theory that I'm offering today by the way, that means a theory that includes everything, leaves out nothing, explains all, has no contradictions, covers the entire kit and caboodle. That's what a unified field theory is. I would suggest to you that A, I didn't come up with this, and B, this was figured out a long time ago by mystics, that everything is mind, everything, and that mind itself manifests and perpetuates all of this. And we are part of mind, and mind is part of us. And when we have the psychedelic experience, when we have that mystical experience with the plants, what happens is that we go beyond the functional daily self that we need to drive to the grocery store and not like just completely crack up or go off a bridge or something. We go beyond that, and we have the experience of being the all and the everything. Paramahansa Yogananda talks about a vision he had watching somebody pour milk, and he said that at that moment he saw God pouring God into God. A beautiful thing. And if the word God turns you off, just substitute spirit. I was living in the desert in Joshua Tree back in the 70s. I was 2. And there were a couple of Tibetan lamas who wound up at the same property as me. They didn't just drop from the sky. It was a meditation retreat place, and they were holding a retreat for their students, and I wanted very much to be able to participate. And so I went to a student and said, hey, you know, can I participate in this? Can I join in on your meditation? He said, you got to go see Lama Yeshe. I said, okay, cool. Now, I had 2 feet of hair. I never wore a shirt, never wore shoes. And all of his students, of course, had to follow all of these like specific behaviors and bow and wear robes and beads and bang on gongs and shit. But I was not part of that. So anyway, I went over to see Lama Yeshe, and I walked into the building where he was, and there's this Lama eating a steak. And I look at him, and I look at the steak, and he looks up at me, he goes, funny, huh? I go, yeah, kinda, sort of, dude. And he said, you know, heart, doctor's orders. And interestingly enough, in Tibetan medicine, for some heart problems, they recommend eating meat. I said, cool by me. You know, I'm just here to see if I can meditate with you. I don't really care what your diet is. And he said, okay, look, you can come to everything but the initiations. And I said, great. So I was living down on a little, kind of a funky little farm property that was attached to this meditation retreat. And one afternoon, you know, a couple of weeks into the time that they'd been there, he came walking down with one of his students, and you can see the student was sort of like an attendant kind of bodyguard type, and in the robes and the whole bit, and there I am drenched in sweat, got hair down to my middle of my back, I'm barefoot, I'm standing out there, hey, Lama Yeshe, how are you? And you can just see this student is like, oh, this guy, he's such a rube. He doesn't know how to address the Lama, you know. Of course, Yeshe, he's got no problem with it at all. He's happy. He's enlightened. What does he care? So, so he came down, and I said, hey, it's great to see you, you know, and I didn't do like any of the prostrations or stuff because it's hard with, you know, you don't have a shirt. And anyway, on the ground, there are these little things called goat heads. If you've lived in the American Southwest, these really hard little things that fall off cactus, and they're very sharp. So you don't want to lie down on them. So anyway, there was a plum tree, and it was bearing ripe fruit. And I said, hey, Lama Yeshe, you want a plum? And you can see the student just like, you know, go, oh, God, you know, this guy, he knows nothing. And Lama Yeshe is like, yeah, sure. So I go get 2 plums. I bring one back to Lama Yeshe. I take one. We both bite in. I look into his eyes. And I am gone, baby, gone. And there's nothing but this ocean of consciousness. And he just gives me this little smile. And then it was back to the finite again. And there we were, just 2 guys with sticky fingers eating plums. I would submit to you that the psychedelic plants reveal to us for periods of time the true nature of existence. the interconnectedness of all things. If you do psychedelics enough, you're going to have the experience of just being blown away in an ocean of love. There's nothing else going on. Love for all beings, love for everything, you know, not necessarily even any specific objects of love, just being a radiant love being. Very much like the painting on the ceiling in that cathedral in Moscow. That these teachers also deliver us the kind of healing that can never be achieved with the talking therapies. Tell me one more time how your bigger brother mistreated you when you were a little boy and beat you before baseball games. That's not helpful. No. Give me a tab of acid. Let me do this right. And let's get out of the office and go surfing. And we'll talk about this afterwards. Yeah, that's the ticket. A Hawaiian healer said a beautiful thing one time that I never forgot. He said, true healing puts into order the body, mind, and spirit with the past, the present, and the future. That doesn't leave a lot out. That kind of includes everything. And we know, yeah, look, if you get into a car accident, as I have previously, it's great to go into the ER and get stitched up and all that stuff rather than saying, yeah, I'm going to go to a shaman and like maybe do some San Pedro, you know. No, get stitched up. This is a good thing. So for trauma medicine, we've got it wired here. But when it comes to the big stuff, medicine thus far has failed us. And yet, the archaic medicines do not fail us. The wounds of the body, I brought a friend who had chronic fatigue for 4.5 years, had done every conventional and non-conventional therapy you could think of, nothing worked. 2 nights of ayahuasca, he was right as rain. Period, end of story. He's still right as rain. This is 9 years later. Good medicine. We've brought people of chronic headaches, people who have had traumas of different kinds, and they resolve them in the ceremonial space. And at some point in their journeying, they have the experience of being completely one with all things. And often that grand experience of being nothing but a being of love. So I may possibly have failed somewhat in my mission of delivering an actual unified field theory. At least I've failed to give an equation, because I think that there are many you know, there's never been a scientific study ever to prove that you get wet when you take a shower. No, I mean it. So many of the things in our lives, there aren't scientific, science can't prove the existence of love. It can't prove friendship. It can't prove loyalty. It can't prove courage. Those are things that we know. We know what they are. And I would submit to you that we have been very, very misled, perhaps purposely, so that we doubt our own senses. We possess within us the capacity to see, to hear, to smell, to touch, to feel, to perceive things, to make judgments, and we do this constantly. And without these capacities, we wouldn't make it through the day. We would all die of grievous misfortune and accidents. And when we take the psychedelics, we get introduced to an even broader and broader field of consideration, in which we understand that it is love and compassion and goodness and service that deliver the goodies, and that division and separateness and greed and hatred always wind up in misfortune and will always fail us. So when we think about the plants, when we think about the psychedelics, even better when we take them. Even better when we chew thoughtfully on the mushrooms. By the way, mushroom omelets, that's the ticket. A a professional photographer ages ago in LA brought me this huge bag of mushrooms, huge. And he said, they've been in my freezer for years. I don't know if they're good anymore. No problem. So I did the smart thing. I only took half of them and made an omelet. I was found in the driveway a while later watering my car. You know, not everything that happens on psychedelics is wise. I just want to point that out. It's fun to do the stupid stuff, too. It's like, are you seeing the clown sitting on top of the fire hydrant? No, dude, I'm not. I once was driving. I used to be the guy that drove everybody else home when we were all tripping as a teenager, and I almost lost those privileges one night when I came around the corner and just went shooting off the road to avoid the campfire in the middle of the road with the gypsies dancing around it in the wagon train. I sadly was the only person who was seeing that. But in general, these are positively transformative agents. These are wisdom agents. These are things that have been brought forth from antiquity to the present. We're extremely fortunate that we have access to these medicines. We're extremely fortunate that we can take the ayahuasca journey, that we can take the mushroom journey, that we can swallow the tab of acid, that we can drink San Pedro, that we can chew the peyote buttons, that we can participate in the ritual and ceremonial and uplifting and spiritually supportive use of these agents in community with others who are also, like ourselves, striving to heal, striving to open up, striving to be better people in a tumultuous and turbulent world. And so this may or may not represent to you a unified field theory. It's okay, because I wasn't really kind of planning on delivering that anyway. But hopefully this does represent to you something that you can take away. We are part of a very unstructured, kind of generally chaotic, overly friendly, mostly loving, kind of hug-oriented, international culture of people who are involved with this work. And the realizations that we have and the sense of beauty that we carry forth can truly and honestly be a light in the world. Thank you so much.